Please allow me to move to the next issue. In that reading, I've done away with quite a bit of material, so you will not wait for too long. Summarized quite a bit of it. And so the next question is whether the accused was in the first accused was in the deceased house on the material date, and whether he was the last person to be seen with the deceased. Now, considering the evidence of PW7, Lee Owen, his evidence is that the first accused person was in the deceased house. Waridi did not testify, and nothing much can follow on his evidence if he has not been tested on it. But the strongest argument the accused person is advancing is that, look, there were these two other male persons. First of all, there were other people, the Kinawaridis, the Lee Owens, the Kakas. Why were they not also investigated? But he advances another argument. The strappings that were used to tie the deceased, the evidence of the government analyst is that it revealed DNA of two unknown males. These are the people who were in that house. And that Dominic Harron. Allow me to make my observation. But before I do that, back to Lee Owen. You know, Lee Owen is the witness who says, I was with the first accused person. And I needed to find out, why is Lee Owen, how can the court admit or disallow, or what is the weight that this court needs to put on the evidence of Lee Owen as the one who saw the accused in the deceased house? And this is what Owen said. That first of all, he stayed with the first accused person in the deceased house for over 1 hour. That was his evidence. Secondly, the first accused person was using coded language. Thirdly, he had a beard. And fourthly, he had brownish eyes. Then he says, in their conversation with the first accused person on that day, these are the words the first accused person said, and I'll quote, that in their conversation with the first accused person in the deceased house on that day, these are the words that the first accused person said. And I've quoted them verbatim. In reference to another country where they account for everybody, not like in Kenya where you can come and do something and just disappear, and someone can impersonate, since we don't have a database. In reference to another country where they account for everybody, in Kenya you can come do something, just disappear, or impersonate somebody, since we do not have a database. And then, of course, Owen says he identified him on the parade. I'll come to the parade. Other than the evidence of Owen, I sought to find out whether there is any other evidence that would place the accused person maybe in the deceased house. And I came across the evidence of PW25, Chief Inspector Frederick Ngahu. attached to the Directorate of Integrated Command and Control Center, and he brought records of the movement of vehicle KCA E03E, the second accused vehicle which the first accused person was using, had indicated, without me having to read in details, that this vehicle was within the subject time and the set time within the Dennis Prit area, and that is within the vicinity of the commission of the offense. And so, it is the finding of this court that there is evidence the first accused person was within the vicinity of Dennis Prit area, the vicinity of the commission of the offense, and that corroborates the evidence of Lee Owen of his presence in the house of the deceased. But I have looked at his submissions about the two male and the unknown, and I took time to think about this. And this is my findings and my observation, that we are talking about DNA on straps. And I'll repeat that. We are talking about DNA being found of male on the straps. We are not talking about DNA on the body of the deceased. Hear me out. Straps, I've taken judicial notice of the fact that there are items that can be purchased from a departmental store, and they can be handled by more than one person: the seller, the buyer, and the end user. And therefore, the possibility of DNA of more than one person being found on these straps is not far-fetched. It's not unimaginable. If we are saying that this DNA was on the body of the deceased, it would put beyond reasonable doubt that those people were in that house and had contact with the deceased. In any case, may I take all of us back to the particulars of the charge? They say, jointly charged with others not before the court. I say no more. But finally, before I move out of that area, the question that we must ask ourselves is, does the fact that there may have been other people who are still at large exonerate the first accused person from blame? My answer was in the negative. Was the first accused person the last person to be seen with the deceased? The doctrine of last seen was discussed in the case of Kimani versus Republic, where the Court of Appeal said this, and I will read it because it's important. The doctrine of last seen alive is based on circumstantial evidence where the law prescribes that the person last seen with the deceased before their death was responsible for his or her death, and the accused is expected to provide an explanation as to what happened. In the Nigerian case of Achi versus Tet, 1993, the court relied on the case of Eastman versus Tet to discuss the doctrine of last seen. And this is what the court said, and I quote, "In the case of Kalbebo homicide, as is in the present one, where the doctrine of last seen has been applied, the law presumes that the person last seen with the deceased before the death was responsible for his death, and the accused is expected to provide an explanation of what happened." The last seen doctrine stands as negation. I will repeat again. The doctrine of last seen stands as a negation and an exception to the doctrine of presumption of innocence. It is therefore tried law that where a victim was last seen by the accused and is found dead, the death of the victim will be presumed, and it will be presumed that the last person he was last seen with is responsible for his death. Therefore, if the first accused person is the one who was last seen with the deceased herein, as testified by Lee Owen, then the first accused person will have the burden to explain what happened to the deceased. Please have a look at the case of Achbong versus State, 2006, LCN. You'll find it in my judgment. It is the finding of this court that the first accused person was in the deceased house on the material date. And he was the last person to be seen with the deceased. The evidence of the protected witness is that Harun, whom he identified on the parade as the first accused person, left that house at 23, that's about 11, and no one else went to that house. It is the evidence of this witness the deceased Sudanese boyfriend was not in Kenya. And there is evidence that this deceased person was supposed to be traveling the following day to go to Dubai to meet the Sudanese boyfriend on business and holiday. The next issue I'm considering at this point is whether the first accused person had a gun on the material date and whether he used it to subdue the deceased. May I have a little more water? The evidence of Brian Kasaine Spira, corroborated by the evidence of no other person than the first accused person himself, is that by 19th of September 2018, the first accused person was in possession of a gun. That gun belongs to Brian Kasaine Spira. And so, it is undisputed that on 19th of September, the first accused person was in possession of a gun belonging to Kasaine, PW17. In fact, Kasaine testified that the first accused person had earlier on borrowed this gun to go on what he said a refresher training, returned it, and then he borrowed it again. And according to Kasaine, and this is important, he was supposed to return that gun after 2 days, but he did it. And so, by 19th September, he had a gun. That corroborates the evidence of Jennings that when they left Roadhouse, the first accused person opened the dashboard of the car and removed the gun after putting a white council on top of his cloth and picked a taxi and went where he was going. And so the question is this: if he was armed with a gun and the gun was not used to kill the deceased, what was it for? I am in concurrence with the submissions by the prosecution that the gun was intended and used for the purposes of subduing the deceased. I'll quickly move to the identification parade. The identification parade was conducted by Chief Inspector Arama. Again, I'm fast tracking, so I'll not go through the rules of a parade. There were witnesses when I looked at the identification parade, and critically so, I noticed the following. One, the identification parade listed 4 witnesses who I do not understand how, but anyway, is there, included the investigating officer. But the investigating officer then was not given an opportunity to go to the parade, but he's indicated as a witness. As I told you, I looked at age and everything that I needed to look at. And the identification parade form has a provision where a suspect is supposed to indicate whether he or she is satisfied in the manner in which the ID parade was conducted. According to the Inspector Araman, who testified as PW28, the first accused person was satisfied that the parade was well conducted. However, it is notable that the first accused person did not sign on that form where he was supposed to sign to confirm that he was satisfied with the parade. Secondly, it is in evidence that PW7, and he admitted Owen, before he went to the identification parade, he had seen the photograph of the first accused person. And so that then must have aided and abetted him to quickly pick up the first accused person from the parade. Thirdly, whereas the officer who conducted this parade, who is Inspector Araman, says that the first accused person was not in a sling, contrary evidence has been given by the prosecution witnesses, including the protected witness. And so, the contradictions can only go to the benefit of the first accused person. And in just emphasizing on the need to conduct a proper identification parade and for the benefit of the office of the DPP, join me in the words of the court in David Mwitawanja and Others versus Republic. Quite good read on identification parade. And this is what the court said. The purpose for and the manner in which identification parades ought to be conducted have been a subject of many decisions of this court over the years. And it is worrying that officers who are charged with the task of criminal investigation do not appear to get it right. As long as 1936, I don't know whether anyone of us was there, the predecessor of this court emphasized the value of identification as evidence and would depreciate considerably unless an identification parade was held with scrupulous fairness and in accordance with the instructions contained in the police force standing orders. They made reference to the case of Ara versus Mango. And so, the court says this: it is not difficult to arrange a well-conducted parade. The orders are clear. If properly conducted, especially with an independent person looking after the interests of the suspect, the resulting evidence is of great value. But if the parade is badly conducted and the complainant identifies a suspect, the complainant will hardly be able to give reliable evidence of identification in court. Whether that is possible depends on clear evidence of identification. I will not finish the question. It is the finding of this court that the manner in which the parade was conducted was fraud, and therefore this court cannot find the first accused person guilty of the offense he's been charged with based purely on the evidence of the identification parade per se. The last question is whether this first accused person committed the offense. And I'll pick on issues I raised and that I've not dealt with, so I'll not repeat what I've already dealt with. The first argument of the first accused person is that he can't have committed an offense in 10 minutes, and that is what